Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Francisco. I work as head of content at Doc. I'm joined today by Elina Cadouri, COO at Doc, and Nick Lambert, CEO at Doc. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good, Francisco.
So you two have been leading a Web3 company for a few years now, and there are several things I'm really curious to ask you. For example, how is a Web3 company different from other companies? What are the challenges of managing one? What is a DAO? What can Web2 companies learn from Web3 companies? But before we dive into it, I want to start with the beginning. What is Web3?
Well, I can pick that one up, Francisco. So I think to understand Web3, we need to go on a very short journey to understand, well, what was Web 1 and what was Web 2 as well. And then we can start to understand what Web 3 is. And basically Web 1 was the first version or the first kind of evolution of the internet. And with that, there was really only a few content creators creating static web pages. So publishers would go on, create content, and that people browsing the web would just effectively consume that data. And interestingly, around that time, most of us don't remember that. And certainly, of course, I'm way too young to remember all that stuff. I say joking. There was no advertisements really allowed in Web 1 either, which is quite a different situation to what we have today. And effectively, Web 1 was a kind of static content delivery network where content was published and everyone just consumed it. Then we moved into Web 2, where that was basically what we have today. Encourages lots more user generated content. So instead of kind of publishers just putting stuff up there, we as users are now interacting it. So we're looking at kind of social media sites, we're commenting on posts, we're uploading YouTube videos, we're kind of upvoting and downvoting, things like that. It's open to a much kind of wider variety of users than what we saw with Web 1. We're also seeing things like podcasts, like we're doing today, kind of tagging, RSS feeds and things like that. So that was kind of really what defines Web 2. And like I say, that's the status quo basically. And then what we're moving to with Web 3, and we're kind of evolving into that as we discuss this, is it refers to the web where it's much more about the individual. So Web 1 was a lot more about kind of companies and publishers. Web 2 was a lot more about maybe building communities. And Web 3 is kind of returning that control and that interest back to the user. So the user will maybe start to have, or what we envision or hope for, is the user would start to have more control over their content. So they're owning their content. They're owning their sometimes identity, which is obviously relevant to what Doc are doing. And then they're potentially controlling who has access to that. Whereas opposed to the status quo today, where large companies effectively give us access to their systems and basically control our data, and they afford us they afford us access to our own data effectively. And so with Web3, there comes a few other things as well. So we're starting to see kind of artificial intelligence come in. We're starting to see things like the semantic web being used, which is kind of a way of linking data, where the kind of meaning of data is linked together rather than just using the kind of keywords and numbers that we've used with previous iterations. And then this type of data can be reused across all applications. So that's really what the kind of differences between Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3 are. So much more user-centric tools that we can use, and really making it more central to the user controlling their information and what they can access.
And from a company's perspective, what are the biggest differences between a Web3 company and a Web2 company, and what are the challenges that only a Web3 company has?
So I can jump in here. So I think part of it also depends how you set up your Web3 company. So for example, with Doc, we had a token sale. So that means we went out to the community and we fundraised from both investors and also from individuals, and gave them an opportunity to be a part of Doc and be a part of the community, and to help fund the project and the vision. that we are working on, and we've been working on. And so that comes with a number of challenges in itself, because we are essentially, in some ways, a more public company, where we have a community that is very interested, is supporting us both financially and by following us, by being interested in what we're doing. And so we have to be a lot more vocal. We have to communicate a lot better about what we're doing as a company, doing things like publishing a roadmap, obviously having a white paper, having a lot of content information for them to understand what we're doing. And then we get a lot of feedback, which can be really great. And it can also be challenging, because, we hear the spectrum of what people are thinking about what we're doing. So it's great because we can really engage with people in our community, with supporters of the project. We can have them participate in different ways that, a traditional company might not be able to, and actually kind of, do things like voting, for example, with tokens, where they hold an asset that's directly tied to the project. And so they're a lot more kind of invested and interested in that way. But we also get negative feedback, and that's fine too. It's challenging what we're doing. There's a lot of ups and downs, and we need to make sure that we can address concerns as well that come from our community. So I'd say that's definitely kind of one of the things that's very, very different with the Web3 company. I'll also add too, I think it's really great because by having that community and having that additional interest in our project, a lot of the community is a lot more informed about what we're doing. So they understand concepts like Web3. They understand, the kind of general, how blockchain works. They can participate in staking. So there's a lot more engagement too, I think, that we see as a Web3 company than we might as, a traditional company. It's kind of more siloed working on their project.
I think that's right. Elina, I was going to add to that as well. I think that's a really good overview. I think as well, I think if you manage the community well, and like you say, there are ups and downs. And I know at Doc, you don't always, we don't always get everything right, but we certainly always try to. But I think that if you get it right on those occasions, then the community can almost become like an external marketing team for you that are kind of fighting your corner, understanding your particular perspective on things, and they're much more informed, like you say. I think it's also useful for marketing teams. So in a Web2, maybe have a more kind of private company where you kind of operate a lot more stealthily if you want to, only kind of releasing the good bits when you want to. That is good in some respects, but also has limitations where also it's harder to test out theories as well. So marketing quite often is, you don't always know what's going to work. And so sometimes you want to run series of market tests to see does certain messages resonate to certain markets. Can I make my product appeal more to them than others? And being a kind of more in the public eye allows you to do all that stuff that you really can't do as a kind of more private, traditionally kind of Web2 type company.
And are there any other challenges from the nitty gritty day-to-day details? For example, legal challenges, because having a company that raised funds through crypto must have some sort of specificities legally, and also accounting.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more complexities on both of those. You spend a lot more paying lawyers and accountants, I think, just to navigate what those kind of uncertainties might be. But there are challenges just because this is a new way to run a company, and this is a new way to fundraise and have a community. And a lot of governments are still establishing, what the regulations are around that, what the guidance is around that. And we, of course, try to be very careful, and mindful of, regulatory concerns. We want to do everything as best we can. So, we do have to sometimes, though, navigate things that aren't always the most straightforward. We've set up both Doc Labs and the Doc Association in Switzerland, just because it's very crypto friendly. There's a lot of Web3 and blockchain companies setting up, especially in Zug. which is considered Crypto Valley. And then on the accounting side, there's a whole host of challenges when it comes to managing a crypto treasury. So managing a portion of our company funds in cryptocurrency and navigating things like, when should we convert funds? When should we hold them? How should we store them? There's a lot of risks around the fluctuations, obviously, with cryptocurrency. So if the market's going up, things are great, but we also have to be ready that, the market can also go down, and how that could affect our runway. And so making sure we're managing those aspects, which, traditional, startups would really never probably have to think about or worry about from that perspective.
I think as well, like the revenue models as well, Francisco, at companies in the past, like a lot of Web3 companies or companies in the blockchain space, it's mostly open source now, or, almost, the majority of companies operate open source code bases, where in the past they would have something that's proprietary and they hide everything away and you only kind of get given access to it and you pay for that access. And so one thing that can make that tricky if you're an open source company in kind of the Web2 world, it's very, very difficult to monetize what you build if you're trying to make stuff kind of open source. And there's a lot of advantages for making things open source as well, particularly around things like security, making sure people have auditability and visibility of how things work. And that's all extremely important, and particularly when you're running kind of networks and things where there's potentially a lot of money involved. You do need security auditors and kind of individual people to be able to look at your code base and analyze what you're doing. And so it becomes very difficult previously to try and monetize open source software. And typically what that meant for that company is they would have to become a support company. So they would build the software. They don't charge for you to use it because it's all open source. So how do I monetize it? Well, I maybe offer you a better service to actually make sure it runs well within your systems. I make sure if something breaks, I go and fix it for you more quickly than I would otherwise. And what like crypto, having a crypto revenue model or a token revenue model built in, which a lot of Web3 companies have, and certainly Doc has, is that also then it gives you a revenue stream, a way to monetize that network, because we are still businesses at the end of the day. And so that gives you that additional tool to be able to monetize open source software. So that's like another important aspect that it brings you.
Oh, okay. And there is a subset of Web3 companies. I shouldn't even call them companies. They are more organizations. Could you explain me what a DAO is?
So DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And the idea is that essentially it could be a group of individuals or maybe small teams kind of participating in running an organization together, purely using kind of, decentralized, methodology. So using things like open government systems where all the participants can vote together using open source to build the technology or whatever the project is that they're working on, and that everything is done, maybe not everything's done on chain, but as transparently as possible. There's no, one person or a small group of people at the core that's really kind of making the decisions. The decisions, as much as possible, are made by the different participants in the DAO. And I'll add to that Doc isn't a DAO, at least not right now. And I think DAOs is conceptually and in practice something that's still really kind of being understood. It's a completely new way to run an organization, to have a project to coordinate with different people. And there's a lot of complexity that comes with it, and things like, things being efficient, making sure that decisions are being made in the right way, that things are, understood and communicated well. And so we ourselves, we have Doc Labs, which is the core team that's working on Doc's technology. And then we also have the Doc Association, which oversees the Doc network. And we do have on-chain governance as part of that. We do have kind of a community. Our code is open source. So we've definitely embraced a lot of aspects of DAOs. But for the purpose of getting the project, really adopted, really, developed, all these things, there is still kind of some middle ground in terms of having, some centralized governance over that until it gets to a point where it makes sense to have it be more open and more decentralized as the project continues.
Elina, one thing that whenever I mention it to my Web2 friends, it blows their minds is the idea that in some DAOs have anonymous or pseudonymous employees.
Yeah, it's a pretty new way of working to have participants or employees in an organization that are completely anonymous or pseudonymous. Maybe they have some username or handle they go by. In traditional organization, if you're hiring somebody, you know exactly who they are. You have you usually see a copy of their identity documents. They fill out information for you. In the case of a DAO, it's completely open. So often anybody who wants to can either contribute in an open source capacity. They can participate in governance, which is great because widens, I think, the participation pool. But also comes with challenges because these are important decisions that might need to be made. There is, as we've seen through history, the recent history, there is a lot of room for fraudulent or malicious behavior when it comes to DAOs. So one great way of addressing that is actually using verifiable credentials, since a verifiable credential can capture information about somebody, and that could look like things like tied to their real life identity, but presented in anonymous ways. So what that could mean is somebody could go and receive a KYC document that proves, yes, I have I am a real person, and I also might not be on any blacklist, or I don't have any kind of criminal history, and I can present that in an anonymous private way to verify that I could participate in a DAO. And a verifiable credential could also be used to capture participation or reputation for somebody in a DAO. So for example, if I've participated in other DAOs and contributed in meaningful ways, or maybe I've participated in governance and voted on measures and shown that I can do that, and being able to capture that activity without somebody having to reveal who they are, and be able to preserve their privacy at the same time.
And Nick, do you think that becoming a DAO is the way forward for every Web3 company?
No, I don't think becoming a DAO is the kind of way forward for everyone or every company. From my own perspective, I think that we can learn a lot from DAOs, and so I think there's aspects of them that are interesting that can be adopted, and so things like on-chain governance, where changes to maybe how the network operates, because most Web3 companies, what they're creating is not necessarily just an app. It is in some cases, but in a lot of cases, it's a whole protocol or a whole platform that they're creating. And so with that comes the ability for stakeholders in the network to participate in how it's run, and the decisions that's made about the technical decisions are made about the design of the network potentially, or how it operates, or changing how it operates. And that's done through on-chain voting or decentralized governance. And typically that is where the token that's inherent with most of these networks is used by the holders of that token to cast votes on kind of referenda that are raised by community members. So someone might want to, for example, increase the validator count. That's the number of nodes that are running inside a network. They might want to increase the number of validators that are running. And so someone would need to use a token and basically propose a change to that way of working and create a referenda in that process. And thereby all the other token holders would effectively vote aye or nay as to whether that's going to be accepted. And the majority is the one that's carried forward. And that weighting, the majority is how many tokens are put forward by each of the voters, not just the number of votes. So that's the way that that can work. So I think that stuff like that is really, really useful. And because we are running decentralized organizations with decentralized communities, it's a really, really good way to give everyone a voice. But I also don't think it works well in all cases. Because not everything can be done on chain, or it's, like non-technical things, maybe where there's domain expertise required, you wouldn't necessarily, and it become quite kind of slow and cumbersome if you're needing to get every little thing voted on, and runs through some kind of on-chain voting process that can take many weeks, depending on how it's set up. Sometimes you want to be able to be moving more quickly or more agile. So I think there is a lot of good that can come from DAOs, but I wouldn't say ditch everything that we've known for the couple of 100 years to this point. I think it can complement what we have, but certainly shouldn't replace it.
Nick, you were mentioning that there are many things that Web3 companies could keep from the ways of managing and govern Web2 companies. And what things can Web2 companies learn from Web3?
I think a big part, Francisco, would be like kind of getting used to that being more in the public eye. So I think building communities is going to be a really big learning curve that Web3 companies or Web2 companies could benefit from doing. And so that's, I guess, being able to communicate your vision, what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it, and then really bringing a group of people, like-minded people, along with you for the ride, recognizing that some people will fall off the ride and become disenchanted with the idea. But for the most part, if you can stay true to your vision, that most people will stay there. And then really being able to use and harness all the kind of different social tools that we have to really grow communities as well, and getting used to those. So I think that would be one of the biggest things that people can do. But like you say, I think a lot of the things that we use to kind of build kind of effective Web2 companies remain the same. So still things like good recruitment, people and process, and all of that stuff, making sure you've got enough money in the bank and funding, those things are still very, very important. But there are a kind of few differences. I think as well, having like a community out there enables you to also test your products. And again, this is something that has been talked about with Web2, particularly out of Silicon Valley, but it's basically ship, quickly and often. And don't be afraid, like don't make perfection the enemy of the good. And so ship very quickly in order that you can get the feedback from your community about where is my product good, where is it weak, what can I change, rather than the organization internally trying to wrestle with this concept of will they like it, will they not like it, and why won't they like it. The best thing to do is just to bite the bullet and put your product out there. And I think having a kind of large interested community, it really lends itself well to that.
We're seeing a lot of people joining Web3, and I'm not just talking about people buying crypto or buying NFTs. There's a lot of people joining Web3 companies. Do you have any tips for someone, and it doesn't have to be a developer, could be a marketing person, it's a HR person, etc., that wants to join Web3 but has no idea how to get in?
So my recommendation for people who want to get into Web3 is to find ways to get involved outside of just looking for work. So that could look like things like participating in crypto communities and following projects, buying and transacting with crypto, even if it's a really small amount, maybe contributing to open source projects, and that could be as a developer, but that could also be in other aspects like with marketing, like being part of an ambassador program, which Doc does have. And then that way, I think they'll get a sense of a lot of, the different unique aspects that come with Web3, both in terms of the technology, but I think also the culture. Web3 has, companies tend to have a very open culture. I think everyone pretty much understands this is a new, really big, exciting thing that we're working on. There's a lot of energy. And I think understanding those aspects of it are really important when joining a Web3 company as well.
And is it that participation in the ecosystem, is it something that you value a lot in the hiring process? Like, is it something you look for specifically if that person has prior interest in the area, etc.?
Yeah, I tend, pretty much I think always almost ask about it. And depending on the role, that interest doesn't have to be, something really big. But I think some basic level of understanding or genuine kind of interest in what we're doing translates back to them, being excited about Doc as a project and Doc as a company to work on as well.
I think as well, like when you're hiring somebody, I mean, you are kind of judging like based on like they're fit for the role now, but like you really care about retention as well when you're bringing someone on, because of course if you were to bring someone on, and of course they could be familiar with Web3, but every project has its own nuance. They use blockchains if they have them differently. They have different use cases, different sectors, and these nuances require kind of an onboarding time and educational process that can take many months and longer. And so you're constantly concerned about kind of retention. Like, is this person, can I see them still wanting to be interested here in a year, 18 months or 2 years time? And so that's why it's really good. Well, certainly I would kind of give like extra marks for someone who's genuinely interested in the space. So although there's people kind of looking to Web3 thinking, I've heard that, it sounds quite interesting, I'll apply for a job. Like, what I'd be looking for is someone that is kind of has demonstrable interest, even if they haven't worked in the space. When you're speaking to them, you can tell they're excited and passionate about like Web3 and owning their own private keys or whatever that means to them, crypto, NFTs. As long as they're kind of passionate and excited by it, they're probably likely to be quite good at it as well because it interests them. So like anything, if you're interested in it, you'd be good at it. If it's something that you think you should do, or it's something that you want to do for like a work thing, then that's probably going to be less appealing, and that will probably come across at any interview process that you go through. So I think the first thing as well for me would be, if you want to work in the Web3 space, that's great, but really work in it because you're passionate about it. If you're not, then probably go for something that you'd be more passionate about.
Thank you. I think that's the episode. Thank you very much. I feel much more enlightened about how it is to manage a Web3 company. Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much, Elina. And see you all in the next episode.